So, and of course, there is a clear connection between the digital space and the digital world, ICTs, and entrepreneurship. So gender could be a dimension there which might be brought in. So Albert Kimbu is my name. As Professor Koo said, I am the head of tourism and transport. I'm the head of tourism and transport department at the University of Surrey, and also a reader, or some people prefer to call it associate professor, but I prefer reader in hospitality and tourism. Okay. So I'm briefly going to start by talking a bit about the 4 areas of my research. And the focus is on, my research is on 4 key areas. Entrepreneurship, 1. And in this regard, I look at entrepreneurship from 4 different dimensions: women and entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. I'm sure everybody, your students are aware of entrepreneurship, but I'm not sure if there are cognizant with the concept of intrapreneurship. Now, intrapreneurship is when individuals engage in entrepreneurial activities within an organization. So it's about individuals being innovative, being creative, being goal-driven within an organization, creating change within an organization to make it grow and make it profitable. So some of my research is looking at how women and men as well engage in both entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, broadly speaking. But I do look at social entrepreneurship as well. So some of my research is focused on social entrepreneurship. And social entrepreneurship is mainly targeted at entrepreneurial activities with an embedded social purpose. So businesses which engage in entrepreneurial activities, or individuals engaging in entrepreneurial activities with not only a view to making profit, but a desire to create change within societies. A third focus of my research on entrepreneurship looks at development-led entrepreneurship. Most often than not, entrepreneurship has been considered as purely economic driven. But recently, there is a drive towards designing entrepreneurial activities that contribute to development. Entrepreneurial activities underpinned by development within communities, especially in resource-scarce destinations. And the 4th angle from research, which is related to entrepreneurship, looks at informality in entrepreneurship. I originally come from Cameroon, which is in Africa. And in most African and Asian countries, when you think about Bangladesh, you think about Malaysia, Thailand, for example, the Philippines, for example, India, for example, more than half of all entrepreneurial activity takes place in the informal sector. However, there is not much research which has looked at this element of entrepreneurship. How do informal businesses operate within a formal context? How do they navigate the different challenges and the opportunities that arise from engaging and operating informally within a formal context? That is the first strand of my research. The second strand is focused on gender. And in this regard, I look at representation. Gender has always and will always be a contentious issue within studies, within social sciences. And in particular, I'm focused on how this is represented and perceived and understood within the context of tourism. Gender is a social construction. How do men and women navigate the different spaces? How do they evolve and morph depending on the context in which they find themselves when performing entrepreneurship? So that is an important strand of my research. The third strand looks at identity and the role of intersectionality in shaping entrepreneurial performance within tourism. And intersectionality here is going to be linked to issues around ethnicity. It's going to be linked to issues around religion, around social class. Because these are key constructs in shaping whether an individual becomes successful or unsuccessful within entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. And the fourth dimension of my research, or strand of my research, looks at stakeholder networks. Research, and some of which I have produced, clearly identifies the importance of networks within organizational cultures. Do organizations encourage the creation of networks, collaborative learning networks? How are these networks manifested? Are they social networks? Are they professional networks? Are they institutional networks? Or are they a mixture of networks, public, private, community networks? And how do they shape entrepreneurial performance? Okay, so those are the four strands that I have been looking at for the last 15 years of research in tourism. And this morning, we will be touching on a lot of these. So what I'm going to do, we'll be looking at 4 studies which I did recently, and how gender, collaborative networks, intersectionality permeate through these studies. And the focus is going to be on women. I have been challenged time and again that I am a man and I'm studying women. Why do I do that? Who gives me the
That's
audacity?
why I'm supposed to ask you that issue. Why you pick that issue for your research interest in? It's quite normal and natural these days. We investigate on gender issue and ethnic issue, cultural background issue, and sort of things. But why you particularly your personal motivation for that? That's my question for you.
Thank you for the question, and a good one at that, you know, and a very good question. Well, I grew up in a family where women were the dominant force. My mother was an entrepreneur. So it springs, first of all, from my background, you know, how I was brought up. My mother was the driver in the house. She was a business owner and she owned multiple businesses. So I grew up seeing her fighting in a society dominated by men.
Okay.
But still being successful and surmounting the challenges that she encountered in the process. That was the first drive.
Okay.
Second motivation was when I moved into the tourism space, I realized that there was very little research which was focused on women.
Right.
And most of the research that was done by on women was being done by women.
Right.
So I thought actually coming from the outside, being an outsider and looking inside, would unravel or unpack some interesting insights, which being an insider, that is being a woman, might not. You know, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to use my outsider perspective and look inside and see what is happening and interpret it. But I have always worked with women academics. So if you look at most of the papers that have been published by myself, they have always been collaboration with women academics as well. So I try to get that balance in most cases. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but most often I try to get a fair balance.
Well, understandable. Good.
And your students should feel free to stop me as well and ask any questions, okay? So don't hesitate if you have any questions in the course of the presentation.
Especially a woman student.
So I'm going to start with a bit of a background. You know, why women entrepreneurs? Statistics shows that women-led startup businesses account for just 2.2% of the over $150 billion that were invested in companies by venture capitalists every year. And this was before the pandemic. After the pandemic, it reduced. So think about it, just 2.2% of over 150 billion is invested by venture capitalists in women-owned businesses. 7% of investor money goes to women-led startups, only 7%. However, women entrepreneurs bring 20% more revenue with 50% less money invested. That is very important. So with less money, women entrepreneurs are able to generate more money than male entrepreneurs. How? And so why don't they get funding? Only 3% of total venture capital goes to companies with women CEOs. And the next slide is going to actually give you a snapshot of what it looks like at the top of the main Fortune 500 companies. Only 15% are CEOs. 15% of women are CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. So this clearly shows that we still live in a world which is purely masculine, where men dominate in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of political power. But if you look at the global population, it's slightly more women than men. If you look at the tourism workforce, it employs more women than men. So why is it that at the top of the ladder, you still have more men? Patriarchal systems are inhibiting it, right? So if you look at in 2022, you had only 74 female CEOs in top Fortune 500 companies. Something needs to be done. But we've seen, the previous slide clearly tells us that if you invest more money in women-owned businesses, they tend to make more profit. So why is there limited investment in women-owned businesses? External research, which I've done by myself and other colleagues, clearly shows that women tend to invest in less economically sustainable businesses. Key characteristics of successful entrepreneurship: innovation, drive, motivation, all those characteristics tend to be aligned with masculine traits, right? So entrepreneurship is clearly aligned with masculinity. But that is not supposed to be the case. Within tourism entrepreneurship, there is very limited attention that has been focused on leadership, leadership characteristics, leadership traits, leadership as a performance. There are also persistent gender biases within entrepreneurship scholarship and how this is conceptualized within entrepreneurial leadership. Gender biases in terms of it being conceptualized from a masculine perspective, because most of the academics who are doing the research are men. And so they perceive it and they view it with masculine traits. Consequently, there have been a persistence of arguments about what is distinct and unique in terms of leadership performance within different entrepreneurial contexts. How entrepreneurship is performed in the Western world is not the same as how it is performed in emerging destinations of Africa, South America, or Asia. But because the narrative and because it is conceptualized through a Western lens, there are always questions on whether that lens that is used in determining entrepreneurial leadership performance in the West can be applied to the global South. There is also a significant gender segregation within entrepreneurship by industry. Okay, women tend to go in the services sector, whilst men tend to focus more on the technology side of technology sector and manufacturing. So there's a persistence of entrepreneurship within industry. And women tend to have a broader range of entrepreneurial intentions and goals than men. So for women, self-realization, managing work-life balance, well-being issues tend to be the key drivers of entrepreneurship. Whereas for men, they tend to be focused on the economic realization. So it's the profit. They are economically oriented in most cases. It is also worth noting that market economies, capitalist economies, have often been accused, and it's been demonstrated that they do fail to self-regulate. If you look at what is happening in the world today, the Fortune 500 companies, they do codes of conduct, codes of ethics, codes of practice. They don't have regulations. That's why you always have, you tend to regularly have those scandals happening in the major corporations. In terms of insider trading, for example, right? In terms of rewards, how the CEOs are rewarded. Because they are left on their own whims and they regulate by themselves. Consequently, because there's the failure to self-regulate, there is that enduring inability to maximize entrepreneurial potential of all groups to generate growth. You have the dominance of men, you have the dominance of Western companies to the detriment of marginalized communities, women, young people, and global South destinations. And gender inequality therefore becomes one of the most prevalent dimensions of the perceived failure of market economies to maximize entrepreneurial potential, because women tend to be neglected. The potential value and contribution of women is often understated. And this is exacerbated by the failure of policy interventions which tend to be gender blind or gender neutral. Most entrepreneurship related policies are not targeted at specific groups. They assume wrongfully that all individuals have the same potential and capacity to be creative, to be entrepreneurial, to be competitive within the market space. And that is wrong. We all know that the laws which function, the policies which guide most interventions are designed to encourage and facilitate and enable men to be more competitive. It is going to take a while. It is going to take generations for those laws to change. It is changing. Most laws within the tourism space now are becoming gender transformative, or there is a drive to adopt gender transformative policies and legislation. There is a drive to adopt gender sensitive legislation, which will enable those groups which have been traditionally marginalized to catch up. Because policy interventions tend to be gender neutral, tend to be gender blind, there is limited understanding within entrepreneurship, especially tourism entrepreneurship, on the processes by which these inequalities are produced and reproduced through policy. And that is where I come in with my research, unraveling and unpacking these dimensions of inequalities, evidencing how the disparities are created, but importantly, how women tend to navigate these spaces to create a name and a place for themselves within tourism entrepreneurship.
Albert.
Yes, please.
I have a comment on your paper and your research agenda.
Thank you.
As you may understand very well, Korean society or not, probably you may have a chance to meet many Korean researchers in London, in England, or other country as well. So one of the big issues in Korean society, as you know, Korea, the male, we have to go military service for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then their young generation complain a lot why women wouldn't go the military service. A woman can go to the military service voluntary way, however, not in compulsory way. So, however, in society, the young generation, the women and girls, they are pay attention for their focusing on their task and the study. So their score is a lot better than the guys in the class in the government examination or public officer test sort of things. So the young guys complain a lot. We are behind from women about a school. And then they have to go to military service about 2 years.
Yeah.
There is a real inequality for young guys and women. Another problem here in society, like when you explained to us the male dominant society in Korea. So even though parents educate the young, the women's girls very well, even pouring the money to equality for their son and daughter, but in the first time it's okay, but in the middle, management level, slowly the woman is behind from the man. Man is more gathering together in society. So that's the true fact in this situation in Korea.
Thank you very much for clarifying for your insights, Professor Ku. I think that is that is really interesting. Korea, China, they tend to invest a lot in the men. Even though, and we say in Korea, the women are invested on, but when they start progressing with society, the men, even though they are less, they have less grades or in academic grades, they eventually leapfrog the women and go ahead. And so is there any research which has looked at that? That's a potential stream of research, for example, how the women and men perform within the tourism space, in terms of leadership performance. I do have colleagues from Korea, actually. Well, I'm sure someone who is actually one of your colleagues there used to be my colleague as well.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I have Bora Kim, who is another colleague here now. Yeah. Yuri was my colleague. She's in Florida now, and actually I have been invited. Yeah, exactly. I'm actually going to be in Korea in April, all things being equal. Yes, I've been invited to do a keynote and at the COPIST conference.
Okay.
By the Ministry of Tourism in Korea.
Oh, really? You should contact me in advance.
Yes, exactly. When everything is confirmed, I'll let you know. Okay. And that's going to be in Busan.
Good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Good. So the first paper, which I'm going to briefly look at this morning, is going to look at how gender is recontextualized within the context of tourism entrepreneurship.
Okay.
Right. So why leadership? I've just said, the slides I showed earlier clearly showed a lack of women in leadership positions within the broader society. It's even the same in the tourism and hospitality industry or sector. We tend to have more women in leadership positions, but men still dominate. So this first study will critically explore the meaning and role of gender in shaping entrepreneurial performance in tourism firms through a post-structuralist lens. Because we look at gender as a very fluid concept. Okay, gender is a fluid concept because evidence and studies have shown that it keeps being produced and reproduced depending on the circumstance in which an individual finds themselves. And within the context of entrepreneurship, this is especially important. Sorry. I need to, this screen here, wait a minute, I need to get off. Sorry, I need to, I need to take away a screen here from the top, which seems to be, it's not supposed to be there. How do I take it off?
Great.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's good. So, we adopt. Oops.
Sorry.
We adopt a post-structuralist lens on studying this in conducting this study, you know. And why did we adopt a post-structural feminist lens? Because post-structural feminism focuses on the instability of meaning. Okay, I don't know if your students have come across post-structuralism and post-structural feminism.
No, probably not.
No,
Yeah.
probably not. Okay, so probably it's something for you some homework for you after this session to reflect on it. But briefly speaking, post-structural feminism focuses on the instability of meaning, and it enables an understanding of how entrepreneurs construct their identities in relation to the choices they make on their way to becoming entrepreneurs. So as I said, post-structuralism is flexible. It is fluid. And gender these days is a very fluid concept. Okay, so post-structural feminism views gender as a social construction produced and reproduced through historic, social, and cultural meanings. So the context in which we find ourselves, the society in which we live, the political institutions which govern us, our societies and our cultures are responsible for constructing, for deciding, for determining the way gender is viewed, how roles in society are apportioned. And this shapes entrepreneurial processes. We decided to adopt this post-structural feminist lens because adopting a structuralist approach is not going to work when we want to understand the minutiae, the details of how women engage in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial leadership and activities. Why is this so? Because structuralist accounts lack insights into the complex everyday subjectivities, everyday ways that subjectivities are performed, right? Structuralists deal with numbers and figures and facts as they see them. Post-structuralists are much more fluid and flexible. Meaning is constructed and shaped by social factors. Structuralist approaches tend to render hierarchical divisions between fixed categories, and consequently, they tend to perpetuate unequal power relations in society. And if you look at most legislation and policies and institutions, they are structural in nature. You have these directors, you have the managers, you have the CEOs, you have the managers, and you have the workers. It's clearly defined. But society does not function that way in the real sense of the word. You have the culture, you have the social values, you have the historic values, which are all responsible for shaping and influencing the way we perform in society, the way we act in society. So we adopted a case study approach, and we focused on Ghana and Nigeria. I don't know if your students have heard about Ghana or Nigeria. That's in West Africa. Those are two African countries. Nigeria is the biggest African country in terms of population and in terms of economy. It has the largest economy in Africa and the largest population in Africa, 201 million people. Whilst Ghana has one of the fastest growing tourism destinations. It's one of the fastest growing tourism destinations in Africa. Right? It has a history of the slave trade.
I see.
So it is very popular amongst European and American visitors.
So they're returning to home country, ancestors' home country.
Exactly. So it is very popular.
Okay.
Right? And importantly as well, there is a very high level of entrepreneurial activity by women in these two countries.
Oh, I see.
So nearly 50%. So 46 and for Ghana and 41% for Nigeria. Of 41% of businesses in these countries are owned by women. However, they are mainly micro, small, and medium enterprises. Okay. And they were also interesting because they are on the research destinations. A lot of the literature which comes out, which you see, is either from the Western world, so Europe and the USA. And now you have a dominance of China as well. A lot of literature comes from China because of the population. And of course, by population and virtue, they have more academics. So a lot of literature now is coming from China, some from Korea, but it is dominated by the Western world. And consequently, there is need to start looking at destinations which are understudied. There is a gap there. Lessons can be learned on how entrepreneurial activity, on how tourism takes place, on how gender relations are manifested and managed in lesser known destinations. So it is, I think it is time to start challenging and questioning Western normative perspectives on how entrepreneurship in general and tourism entrepreneurship in particular is performed. And that's why one strand of my research looks at performance. We adopted semi-structured interviews as methods, as our key methodology. And this involved interviewing women entrepreneurs who led and owned a range of tourism micro, small, and medium enterprises in Ghana and Nigeria. And this was done through purposive sampling. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but they had a range of industries, of businesses, including homestays, hotels, travel and tour operators, transport businesses, local restaurants and food and beverage facilities, as well as travel consultancy businesses. So, and there were a range of them. You had those who employed up to 500 people, who ran businesses in the millions of dollars, and those who ran businesses in the tens of thousands. So across the spectrum. But they were mostly women. However, to get a sense of balance and parity, we also interviewed men to see and determine if their entrepreneurial leadership performances were going to be different from those of women. Because most research, it's sometimes researchers, when they're focusing on men only, don't get the other side of the spectrum. And it is really important for your students in particular that when you go out and you start conducting research, if you are dealing with issues relating to gender, having a balanced view is very critical. If you are interviewing only men, or if you are surveying only men, make sure you have a control group. That control group enables you to have balance. That control group enables you to ensure that if any findings that you bring, that emanate from your study are going to be difficultly challenged, they're going to be solidly grounded. It's very important. So what were the key findings after these interviews, which were analyzed using a content analysis? The first theme that emerged was how women negotiated entrepreneurial performances. Gender alone was not the key determinant of entrepreneurial performance. Rather, what we observed was that entrepreneurship enabled women opportunities to manage their work and family in ways not formalized, not available through formal employment. If you remember one of the first slides in the background, I did mention that women had multiple goals for engaging in entrepreneurship. And one of which was balancing their work and their private lives. That ability to have time, that flexibility. And this was very evident in our through the discussions with our interviewees. Work and family was critical. remember this is in Africa, where there are still traditional family values, where women are still expected to perform certain roles at home. And so this was very important for them. Engaging in tourism entrepreneurship provided that opportunity to work, not to be able to stay out for long, but to be able to manage their children, to be able to take care of their homes whilst generating income for themselves. This led to a second theme, that ability of being flexible. Flexible in terms of not only being able to balance their work and their family lives, but flexible in terms of how they led their businesses, how they manage their businesses. Okay? Normally, there is the expectation that men are those who tend to be autocratic, who tend to dictate on their employees. No, these women who were interviewed made it clear to us that there were times in running their businesses where they adopted an autocratic leadership style, where they dictated how the operations of the organization had to be performed. So when it came to decision making, sometimes they had to make those decisions without consultation because they thought those businesses were their businesses. However, at other times, they delegated power to their employees. So there was quite a lot of flexibility there in terms of how they led their organizations. The situation and the context determined whether they took on full leadership responsibilities and dictated to their employees, or they delegated authority and responsibility to their employees, which meant that they were free to manage other aspects of their operations. And this finding actually contests normative perceptions that men and women tend to behave differently as leaders. Whereas men are often seen as having a much more predominantly autocratic leadership style, and women are seen to be much more flexible in their leadership, our study here actually said, no, the lines are blurred. Women, depending on the circumstance, tended to be quite hard and firm, but at other times they were much more flexible and delegated their authority. Furthermore, another interesting finding was that gendered norms and practices still influence entrepreneurial performance. So in spite of adopting male leadership traits, societal expectations of being a woman was still a very critical element in how they manage their businesses. I mean, there are quotes there, which some of them are long. You might want to read them. And I can, as Professor Cole says, the slides are going to be shared later on. What we observed was that in most African societies, if you are a married woman, at certain times of the day, you are not allowed, or it is not seen normal for you to go and dine with a man in a restaurant at a certain time, especially in the evenings. So you might go on a business trip. It might be a business trip, but society frowns on that and sometimes sees those women as being irresponsible, right? So the women leaders we interviewed were very conscious of these societal norms. And so it still tended to influence and inhibit some of their practices. They could have done it otherwise. But the women were not prepared to be constrained by these societal restrictions. They still adopted other methods of dealing with these challenges. Trust was another key finding which emerged from our study. Trust has generally been discussed outside of its cultural construction and is normally recognized as being gendered. Why do you think? I don't know how this in Korea, but I don't know if any of your students has looked at trust. In Korean society, who is more trusted, the man or the woman? Who is more trustworthy, culturally speaking?
Frankly, woman is more trustful than man, I guess. I don't know, but people, we are the becoming aging society. So yesterday I discussed with this aging society to my sister, and due to the going aging society, woman is more opportunity to work in aging society. They take care of old people in detail and flexibly and more trust than men. So men is getting harder and harder in aging society. We have to find out the decent job in aging society. But after graduation from the normal society, like working in Samsung and then retire, they have nothing to do. So this a man is a hard time in these days. Woman is more flexible and finding a job with the trust. That's my personal view of this aging society in Korea.
Thank you. And I think in many countries out of the West, Africa and Asia, women tend to be much more trusted than the men, and that's a perception. It's not often true, but the perception is that women, because of their familial and caring responsibilities, can be more trusted.
Yes.
And this was also the case with our study. The men who owned the businesses always tended to have women as their deputies because they felt more comfortable entrusting those responsibilities to women rather than men. Some even said men will tend to spend the company resources much more faster than the women. Right? And as a result, because trust was seen as a feminine trait and a feminine characteristic, women entrepreneurial leaders tended to easily access more external resources than men leaders that we interviewed. So that was interesting. On the contrary, if you come to the Western, to the West, and we will see later, men tend to access more resources than women. What is also important to note here is that the resources that these women accessed had access to were from microfinance institutions and other informal financial institutions, lending institutions, where a lot of the transactions there are determined based on trust, as well as collateral security, which is provided. Consequently, this particular study has enabled us to start questioning the hegemonic constructions regarding what it means to be a successful entrepreneurial leader. Not only are male traits important, but trust, flexibility are equally key determining factors, and women tend to manifest these traits. So the structuralist perceptions of what it means to be an entrepreneur and how entrepreneurship needs to be organized was questioned. Age was another theme which came out as an important determinant in shaping entrepreneurial performance. I believe it's the same in Korea, where older people are treated with respect. What we uncovered was that for young entrepreneurs, young women entrepreneurs, sometimes they were not taken seriously when they approached financial institutions, for example, to get loans. They were looked upon as, no, I can't do business with you. You're too young. You're a woman. I can't trust you. Right? The formal financial institutions didn't look at younger women as being capable of being leaders, of leading businesses. And this is because of the perception that age is a culturally constructed phenomenon. And this is often aligned with wisdom, respect, and maturity. So young people had an issue. How is it in Korea? Professor Ko, with regards to age, how does that work in Korea? Are older people seem to be wiser and more experienced and
we used to think like that way. We used to thought like that way, but I very wonders about that you know provolve or that the traditional thinking, because the I'm old, also I'm getting old, and I think my mental status still remain at the early stage of adult, which means people not changing. We we the Asian society, long term historically, we set up the society as a hierarchical way and the aging way. Even the young guys still use brother and sister, elder brother, elder sister among the college, classmates. There's a ridiculous strange in Korean society, even same similar age groups, and the people still believe and pay respect for their aging adults, which is sometimes good, but sometimes it's very bad. They still remain the same way when they used to be. They don't change at all. Even they are very conservative about something, economically conservative and politically conservative and socially conservative. So it's a very controversial issue in Korean society, actually. And
okay.
then,
Yeah. No, thank you. It is the same in most African societies as well. It's more or less the same thing. It's quite they tend to be open and conservative at the same time when it comes to age. Because it is seen as a sign of wisdom. It's seen as a sign of maturity, experience. So what most our interviewees told us was, whether it's a man or a woman, they would trust or prefer to deal with somebody who is more older. And that was a challenge for them. However, what this particular study does is that it starts to make us to reflect and query the narrow global conceptualizations of entrepreneurial leadership success. Okay, what is entrepreneurial leadership and what is success? The global North leadership looks at success purely from an economic perspective. But what these women we interviewed made us understand was that success is relative. Success is not only economics, it's not only about profit maximization, but it's also attaining a fair work-life balance. It's also having that ability to decide what you want to do, how flexible you can be in terms of your work and your private life. Second, this study recognizes the complex ways the entrepreneurs negotiate the entrepreneurial journeys and the critical role of culture in shaping the enterprise context. Right? So unlike the Western-driven studies, which are mostly structuralist driven or oriented, this study tells us the culture and societal expectations, societal norms and values, they are critical in shaping the entrepreneurial journey. Third, the study highlights how success is defined in differently across different contexts. Okay, so success is not only about profit maximization, it is a lot more. And importantly, the study provided new insights to unpack and highlight the role of policy and specific place-based context in shaping cultural expectations on the enactment of entrepreneurial leadership and what entrepreneurial leadership performances might look like. Leadership performance is a flexible concept. And depending on the situation in which these women and men found themselves, they behaved and acted differently. Some were autocratic, at times they delegated authority. Trust was a critical determinant, but age also played an important factor. So leadership performance is a very flexible and changes within a specific context, and it shapes entrepreneurial performance and outcomes.
Wow.
The second study, which
Go
published in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism, looks at finance. One of the key issues which the previous study I identified was access to finance, the importance of networks and access to finance. This study will look at the role of finance and how tourism entrepreneurship is financed, the role of gender in shaping how tourism entrepreneurship is financed, and the inequalities that it reproduces. And this is based on a study in Spain of a particular network in Spain called the Emprendedor Network. But a bit of background before we proceed. Extant research clearly indicates that women tend to apply for smaller amounts of funding and are less likely to apply for external funding. Why is this the case? Because they tend to have smaller capital needs, because their businesses tend to be smaller compared to businesses owned by men. Women also tend to see themselves as being discriminated or disadvantaged against when it comes to entrepreneurship in general and entrepreneurial finance in particular. Furthermore, women tend to be risk averse. And that is why,
they have to take care of their son and daughter and family and their parents.
Exactly.
They're more reasonable person than man. Man
exactly.
is more sometimes a stupid choose and adventuring and challenging something uncertain stuff.
Exactly. And that also determines now the type of loans or the type of credit that they would normally take. Unlike men who don't sometimes tend to go out or take a lot of risk. Right? And importantly as well, women are likely to undertake social and environmentally oriented entrepreneurship. And why is this the case? Because of their caring responsibilities. Unlike men who tend to go all out for economic-driven profit maximization in the entrepreneurial endeavors, women businesses tend to be aligned with their caring and social roles in society.
So I believe the national policy should support them. That means a woman who can be able to challenge further, much more risk-taking stuff. So like a Western society, France, German, England, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they set up the rule and the policy and regulation for making the gender equality society.
Yes.
Where they can, jump on the entrepreneurship and the challenge and the dreaming stuff sort of things.
Exactly. That you have the rules. You know, there are a lot of policies now in the Western world which have tried to smoothen out the gaps, the inequality gaps between men and women. But the challenge is those rules are not applied. When it comes to application, they still face the same hurdles. The rules are not applied, and that is always the problem. This particular case study is based in Spain. Spain has the rules, basically EU rules, which are all geared towards ensuring gender equality and equity. But as we will see, there is a problem in terms of funding. So, with regards to this particular study, we looked at a funding scheme called Emprendedor. And what is important to note is that women business owners in industries that are perceived as feminine tend to experience fewer challenges because their roles in these businesses are considered to be aligned with their caring responsibilities, with their familial obligations, and consequently, they easily perform these roles. Secondly, there tends to be very limited information about firms they are lending to when you have funders lending out capital because of poor bookkeeping and poor information gathering. So when firms are lending out, banks, for example, and financial institutions are lending out money, women-owned businesses don't keep data on their economic and social performance. That's a problem. Women-owned firms tend to be smaller and are generally considered to be disadvantaged. Banks and financial institutions tend to prefer to lend to bigger firms because they have the required collateral security and so appear to be more trustworthy. And consequently, lenders do favor physical assets over intangible ones. And if women-owned businesses are in the services sector, like hospitality and tourism, then of course they're not going to have physical assets. Tourism is intangible. And banks and financial institutions don't trust it to give out money without actually seeing bricks and mortar, like we call it here, we say in England. Tangible assets, machines, buildings, infrastructure are much more desired by financial institutions. Furthermore, lenders tend to favor firms who are innovation-oriented and have a strong technological focus. And that is where ICTs come in, information and communication technologies, engineering. That's what lenders tend to favor when borrowing or lending money. But in which sector sectors are women businesses? It is in the services, mostly in the services sector, including tourism, hospitality, and events. So they are at a disadvantage. Furthermore, women and as lenders tend to focus on visible surrogate indicators, profitability in particular, annual turnover. That is what lenders want to see before they give out loans. And if women run smaller businesses, then it is obvious that their profit margins are going to be lower, that their annual turnovers are going to be lower. So they are automatically disadvantaged when it comes to lending. And importantly as well, funding outcomes tend to be gender blind in their continued prioritization of revenue. What does this mean? Financial institutions, lenders don't put a gender component as a decider when giving out loans, when making decisions on who to fund and who not to fund. They are gender neutral, and that disadvantages women, especially considering that we operate, we function, we live in a society where men make most decisions and where most regulations are gender blind. So this study, based on that background where women are clearly disadvantaged when it comes to funding, this particular study aimed to understand how gender inequalities are reproduced via policy interventions, right? Professor Cruz just mentioned there about policies, right? And here we are looking at how these same policies, which are supposed to help reduce inequalities, actually perpetuate these inequalities. And in order to do this, we adopted a feminist political economy perspective. Feminist political economy views economic processes that are not based on equality as harmful to societies and as being unsustainable. Okay, so feminist political economy aims to balance, to create a level playing field for men and women. And in so doing, it questions neoliberal discourses which contend that all individuals have the potential to achieve success without any due consideration of any other variables such as gender, such as age, such as education, and other intersectional variables. So this, again, this is linked to adopting a post-structural feminist approach. Whilst post-structural feminism looks at the fluidity of gender, post-feminist political economy looks at the importance of embedding equality in all economic processes to ensure and engage in, to have sustainable outcomes. What did we look at? Emprendedor is a funding scheme in Spain that is dedicated towards providing funds for tourism and hospitality businesses. So it is a call. Calls are used to be made annually, and the businesses could apply. And they were then assessed, and those which were deemed to be to be of good quality and deemed to be sustainable were awarded funds of different amounts. During the period that we examined, there were 3 different schemes, 11 call documents were examined, 996 applications were made, and we looked at the legal documentation, their business plans, and the formal applications through a content analysis, which was both inductive and deductive. From a deductive perspective, we looked at the gender in relation to applications made to fund technology and innovation. From an inductive side of it, we tried to identify the relevant topics from a gender perspective. So which topics did men apply to and which topics did women apply to? The 996 applications were then analyzed statistically as well. Through descriptive analysis, we also applied a decision tree and odds ratio using binomial and logistic regression, right? So the focus here was on different sub-programs. One was on the 3 sub-programs, research and development, innovation, in product development, and young entrepreneurs. So whilst the emphasis was not only on men and women, it was also aimed at supporting young people to get funding to start work, to operate businesses in the tourism sector in Spain. So what are some of the key findings that emerged from this? The first thing was a clear gender perspective on the applications. Women made up only 15% of all applications. So we looked at 900 and they were all 932 applications. So only 143 were from women. That is already a disadvantage. And this is important if we consider that the tourism, hospitality, and events is favorable towards women and tends to attract more women entrepreneurs. But when it comes to funding applications, men tend to dominate. Another important finding was that women applications had smaller budgets, less than 300,000 euros. Men tended to apply for higher amounts of funding. More women made loans under 100 euros than men. So women tend to go for the smaller pots. And again, this can be linked to their risk-averse nature. Women-led enterprises were more significantly likely to be in hospitality, whilst men enterprises were in information and communication technologies. Again, you see that disparity. Women go for the services, men go for technology-related businesses. Very, very important and interesting. When it came to age of the businesses, women tended to have operated their businesses for much more longer than men. So again, you think sustainability of the business. Women are much more careful when it comes to running their businesses. And because they operate in the hospitality sector, they tend to stay longer. Men are risk takers, and they tend to have, the businesses tended to have a shorter lifespan or to have operated for a very limited amount of time. Right. Second characteristic here, second theme which emerged was success ratios. What were the key characteristics of successful applications? Men did not only make up more applications, but they were also more successful. Only 19% of women applications were successful. And that's a problem. Whilst 33%, 1 in 3 applications from women were successful, but only 19% of women's applications were successful. And women had a higher probability, men had a higher probability of being successful than women. Why is this the case? Because of the type of businesses that they managed. ICT applications, professional, scientific, and technologically related applications were much more favored than hospitality applications. And as we've seen, women's businesses were more in the hospitality domain. So automatically, they were disadvantaged. And this is as a result of the gender-blind approach that was adopted in deciding the applications. The third theme that emerged was the relationships between the gender, size, and economic activity of the applicants. Projects related to ICTs were identified and had a higher percentage of acceptance and were done by men compared to women. So even though men and women applied for ICT projects, men still had a higher success rate than women when you look at ICT projects only. And that raised questions. Why is this the case? Second finding, when it came to size of business, was that applications between 300,000 euros and under 900,000 euros tended to be more successful. But as we've seen, these applications were made by men. Women who applied for smaller grants were less successful. And that's a problem. Consequently, men were 2.31 times more likely to be successful than women in all applications. And that's a problem. So the different themes and the different findings clearly indicate that men had an upper hand, men had an advantage over women when it came to funding, in spite of the existence of policies in place, in spite of the existence of institutional frameworks to determine and provide support to businesses in tourism, because these policies were gender blind. So what conclusions do we draw from this study? There was the persistent prioritization of innovation and information and communication technologies as drivers of competitiveness, with a focus on technology. And because women tended to apply for lesser funds, women tended to apply for funds to operate businesses in hospitality rather than ICTs, the inequalities tended to be perpetuated and reproduced. Secondly, women applied for funds which were smaller, and the funders preferred to give money to applicants who applied for larger funds, between 300,000 euros and 900,000 euros. A third conclusion which we drew from this study was that the barriers that women faced with this particular funding scheme extend beyond fixed typologies. Okay, so when we control for factors like project size, women were less successful. And this meant that they experienced a double gender gap. So not only didn't they receive the funding, not only did the policies favor them, were unfavorable to them, but they didn't even get the funds when they applied for smaller funds. So they were doubly discriminated upon. A fourth conclusion we can draw from this study is that women remain underrepresented in tourism leadership in management positions, despite constituting 53% of bachelor's and master's graduates, and despite tending in some developing country destinations to have most of the businesses. But they operate as micro, small, and medium businesses. The final conclusion we can draw is the need for training in technology for women entrepreneurs. There is need to provide access for women to strengthen their technological awareness, their technological skills, as this will enhance access to technology and reduce the structural barriers that they are currently facing. The third study, and these studies are all interlinked. Okay, so the third study, which I'm going to talk about very briefly this morning, is looking at women entrepreneurship orientation, networks, and firm performance within the tourism industry in the resource scarce context. Again, this was a study published in Tourism Management. We've seen that women, from the previous study, women tend to apply for lesser funds. Women tend to operate in more hospitality businesses than technological businesses. Networks are critical in determining their success. So how is this actually manifested? So what this study aimed to do was to examine how women entrepreneurship orientation and the performance nexus is intermediated by networks. The inability of women to generate capital for their business through official channels, through formal financial institutions, has pushed them to start creating their own networks, to form their own collaborative networks. And consequently, it is important to understand how their entrepreneurship orientation is influenced, is mediated by these networks. As a result, we looked at network theory and specifically focused on social ties and network acquisition capabilities of women to drive and sustain their entrepreneurial businesses. This was a purely quantitative study which surveyed 556 women entrepreneurs in Ghana and Nigeria. And we used a convenience-based structural equation modeling to test the model. A bit of a background and some key findings here after the background. What we discovered was that entrepreneurial orientation is critical in influencing a firm's social ties, how it acquires resources, and how it performs, either positively or negatively. Women entrepreneurs who were good at creating networks, who were driven towards creating sustainable businesses, tended to be much more successful, tended to be much more performant economically as well as socially. Secondly, women entrepreneurs who established strong business ties with government agencies were capable of acquiring more resources, and women entrepreneurs who were able to establish strong ties with their suppliers were able to also engender good business, not only for their suppliers, but also for their businesses. So strong ties, strong networks are critical in determining the success or failure of women-owned businesses. A third finding was that business ties are very highly beneficial when they mediate the effect on entrepreneurial performance. Also, entrepreneurial orientation in firm performance was seen to be weak and negative when the effect was sequentially mediated by business ties and network resource acquisition. What do these findings tell us? It tells us that women have to look for alternative ways if they have to sustain their businesses. Policies alone don't help. Networks are critical. Networks are critical not only in ensuring that they have access to new markets, but critical in ensuring that networks form the basis for them to acquire the skills which they require to manage their businesses effectively. And these networks can be both formal and informal. They are with the government, very formal networks through women associations, but also informal networks through women private industry associations, as well as community and social associations. Different levels of networks, but they are all important in determining and shaping the business performance. The last study, which I'm going to briefly look at today, is looking at the role of policy. We've seen that networks are important. The first study more or less looked at leadership and entrepreneurial performance. The importance of networks was highlighted. The second study looked at funding, or the lack of funding and access to funding, the challenges of women accessing funding when it is in purely formal circumstances because of the gender-blind policies that exist in place and other structural inequalities. The third has looked at the importance of entrepreneurial orientation in networks. And the fourth now comes back to look at the role of policy. Because networks cannot only be formal. Women entrepreneurs can't operate in a void. The policies need to change. Policies need to move from being gender neutral to being gender transformative. And these policies are going to shape whether women entrepreneurs, as well as men entrepreneurs, are successful within the tourism and hospitality industries. So this paper, which was published which was published last month, has a look at this. It brings down it basically underscores the importance of social policy in tourism entrepreneurship from a gender perspective. So what we sought out to do was to develop a special issue in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism, which has just recently come out, which looked at how gender entrepreneurship and the nature of gender entrepreneurship and social policy in tourism. Okay, so we looked at studies. It was a call for papers to look at these 3 different areas within the tourism context and to see how this is manifested, this is practiced across the globe. So this paper synthesizes these studies in addition to all the other studies which I've mentioned before and the other ones, and some which I have not mentioned. So we set out to understand the gender nature of entrepreneurial pathways in relation to the role of social policy. And in so doing, develop an overarching framework for delineating the intersection of gender, entrepreneurship, and social policy, as well as propose a research agenda that situates social policy more centrally within considerations of gender and tourism entrepreneurship. Because gender and women in particular are the bedrock of society. In our sector, in tourism, hospitality, events, leisure, they are the drivers. Entrepreneurship becomes an extension of their caring and familial responsibilities. And they are more trustworthy, as we have seen. So it becomes important to discuss how these 3 dimensions, the role social policy can help empower women and promote their entrepreneurial endeavors. What we found out by reviewing the 8 papers in this special issue and by reviewing the different research publications that I, together with other colleagues, have done on this topic, was the one. Gender is a key variable when it comes to enabling or disenabling inequality, as well as access to physical and digital spaces, what we call the phygital space. The last study there. Somebody speaking?
No, you can go.
Come again, Professor Cole. Was somebody speaking?
Yep.
Okay. So what we discovered, and what is very evident now, based on the cross-section of studies, is that inequalities tend to be perpetuated. And this is as a result of gender. And these inequalities are contributing to enabling or disenabling access to the phygital space. The last study, which looked at the financing tourism entrepreneurship, it was clear that women didn't apply for women tended to apply for businesses which were in the tourism and hospitality side of things. They did not apply for technology-related businesses. Consequently, there is need to enhance and improve access. And this can be done through training. This can be done through conscious policy, which targets specific groups. And women should be amongst these groups. Targeting specific groups with training and opportunities will enable them to access these technological divides, these technological resources, and this will help grow their businesses. So there is more research needed in this. It is also crucial to understand how gendered bodies are constructed through tourism entrepreneurship policy and how these are reproduced within entrepreneurial ecosystems. Okay. The first paper on entrepreneurial leadership clearly showed that gender was a very flexible construct. We adopted a post-structural feminist approach to clearly unpack and evidence that gender is not static. Gender is not fixed. And the women we studied, as well as the men who were part of the interviews panel, clearly indicated that they were very flexible when it came to enacting their leadership qualities. And so policies need to realize this. Entrepreneurial policies need to take this into consideration, need to consider the context within which these bodies are reproduced and constructed and constantly reconstructed. A third finding is the importance to understand the consequences of having digital disparities amongst entrepreneurs. There are areas which are considered to be digital deserts. I'm sure Professor Ku, I'm sure you and your students, you do a lot on the ICT side of things. So probably there's quite a lot of research in your institution which has examined the digital disparities across countries, across industries, across sectors. And it is evident from these different studies that there is a wide gap amongst entrepreneurs when it comes to digital disparities. And gender is an important variable here, together with age, social class, culture, the geographic spaces within which entrepreneurs live and operate. And this gap needs to be closed. So there's need for policy which will enable these digital divide and disparities to be reduced. Further insights are also required into how gender inequalities are reproduced through the lack of quality data. When we set out to do this spatial issue, there was very limited information. Very few studies have looked or have sought to unpack the gender nature of tourism entrepreneurship. Very few studies have sought to look at how inequalities create the disparities that exist. And even studies which have looked at this, they don't provide the data. So data needs to be collected. And the UNWTO is actually working and driving this agenda at the moment. The need for data to evidence any actions that are undertaken. So policies, processes, rules, and regulations need to be underpinned by solid research and solid data. Furthermore, there is need for research that adopts a gender lens approach within policies. We saw from the last study that most policies are gender blind. And because they are gender blind, they perpetuate inequalities. So there is a need to adopt a gender lens approach, not only in policies, but in how societies, how businesses operate. There is need to understand the specific, the specific contextual conditions of each society. And researchers need to start moving away from adopting and using the Western-centric top-down approaches that have been predominant in current research to looking and adopting context-specific approaches, designing measures and theories which are contextually bound. That is very important. Secondly, still looking at how we bounce back, because it's bouncing back from the crisis, but it's also bouncing forward to adopting an alternative worldview of entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship which is gender focused, entrepreneurship which actively and consciously introduces, embeds gender as a key variable. And this can only be done by reducing the inefficiencies that exist in current institutional policies. There is a lot of drive now by the UNWTO in particular and other institutions towards the adoption of gender transformative policies. Not gender reactive, not gender neutral, not gender blind, but gender transformative policies. And that becomes important if businesses in tourism, hospitality, and events need to be resilient and need to be sustainable. If equity and equality need to be core factors that underpin tourism entrepreneurship. This desire for transformation is not captured in existing policies. It needs to be captured in new documentation, in new policies. Women tourism entrepreneurs are good at actively seeking support. They are also excellent at finding and deploying alternative ways to respond to crisis. In other words, they are resilient. And I think policymakers, male entrepreneurs, need to learn from the experiences of women entrepreneurs, need to learn lessons, need to collaborate more. And this is where collaborative learning networks becomes the key. It is also important to develop sustainable business models that are capable of overcoming the day-to-day business challenges. This will enable them not only to survive, but to thrive. And these sustainable business models, from our studies, we were able to clearly show how women entrepreneurs are better at designing business models that are more resilient to the effects of crisis, but also more resilient to the challenges that they face in their day-to-day operations. Consequently, it becomes very imperative for businesses at large, tourism, hospitality, and events industry, for governments to consciously, proactively, and seriously consider women entrepreneurship, women tourism entrepreneurs, and their business models as a driving force to shape tourism for the future, tourism for tomorrow. On that note, I will stop for now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Dr. Kimbu, great
yes, sir.
lecture. And you're the, woman and man is always a hot issue in the modern society. Like Rosa Luxemburg, she is made the Communism Party in Germany and innovative society. She challenging. So gender equality and gender inequality issue is very, very important. Like what you mentioned to me, I am pretty much focusing on ICT, AI, and smart tourism sort of things. I don't consider much gender equality and gender issue into my research context. But however, these days, since the conversational AI emerged since 2023, and the conversational AI, ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, they are talking like a human, and they are talking like a human, and it seems try to be like what be a human being with a human-like person. Anyway, people, a lot of researchers these days are working research on the human-like conversation and sort of things, and not only entrepreneurship, like anthropomorphism with AI. But I think like the kind of a new era of AI. Anyway, we are talking about the human-like conversation, but that must be reflected by existed issue, men and women. What do you think about the conversation AI? They act like human beings, but anyway, the AI is a neutral or woman oriented or man oriented. How they conversation just like a woman like, how they react just like a woman like or man like. There's a lot of issue ahead of us with AI.
Good. That's an interesting observation and question at the same time. I have to admit I have no clue about, well, no clue in brackets about AI. That is true, but I have basic information, and I read a bit of basic knowledge, basic research on AI. First thing, most of the, if when you do, let's look at voices. AI voices are mostly female.
Yes.
Why is that the case?
Navigation girl. We follow the navigation girls every day.
Exactly. That is something worth looking at. The female voice is more appealing, and the female voice is probably going to draw more attention than the male voice.
Yes.
Right. So that is something there. Who decided it? Second, the algorithms which have been which are behind AI. Who are the key drivers? Who are the designers of those algorithms?
That's right.
Are they more men or are they more women?
Yeah.
So
that's your paper is so important, because even though we are developing AI fastly and approach, but who designed that AI?
Exactly.
What kind of guys they got sought? Probably they apply for that AI based on their thinking.
Exactly. So that is potential research there, which needs to be done.
Sure.
Especially maybe not broadly speaking, but looking at it, AI for tourism. AI which is directly linked to tourism. Who are those? Who are those who design it behind the finished product?
Right.
Who are those designing the algorithms, and how is gender an influence in shaping the way those algorithms are designed?
Yes.
Has there been some thought to that? And if you link that to tourism again, how is AI shaping tourism entrepreneurship? From the studies there, it's clear women are less in technology. So how is the current development of AI going to shape entrepreneurship of tomorrow? And is gender going to be a factor of consideration?
Yes.
Those questions need answers. And so probably a research which we might want to talk about and consider. You come in with your AI expertise, I come in with my gender expertise, and then we get a paper together.
Right. That's important. We are just the beginning of AI era, and a lot of AI stuff is applied for many contexts, not even the tourism hospitality context, but general context.
General, yeah.
General context. But like when you explain to us, woman is much more suitable for service industry and sector, and man is better for ICT
Technology.
or manufacturing or sort of hard work task. But how we can try to match the AI with the gender into the context? In the service industry, hospitality industry, in front desk of hotel, probably we are pre-trained, inherited thought like, okay, we adopt woman's voice for AI in front of the hospitality, the front desk, and with the woman face.
Yes, and exactly. So that's where it comes in. So front service is the care, right? It's about care. It's about well-being. It's about being hospitable.
Yes.
And that is where, again, women's roles become more important. You have to adopt a certain character. You have to play a certain role, which is considered to be feminine. And then women's voice might be the norm, right? But then if you go to back office, accounting, finance, is it still going to be the woman's voice which is going to be deciding, right? Yes. So is it going to be, how is that designed?
Yes.
That is something which needs investigation. The answer, I don't have.
There's a lot of research opportunity with the gender and AI.
There is quite a lot of research opportunities there, and I think one of the things which we found out, the digital space, that blending between the digital space and the physical space, that is very important. And that has not been looked at in the literature, right? So how do you use AI to enhance the experience of a tourist? How do you use AI to enhance the service provision? How do you use AI to enhance the transactions, the fluidity of transactions between not only the suppliers, so basically along the tourism value chain.
Yes.
And does gender play a role in that? Furthermore, how do you adapt AI and other technologies to context or destinations which don't have the capacity? So is there a possibility of designing easily accessible programs for destinations which have lower internet bandwidth, which have lower internet connectivity, or for persons and groups who are not technologically very savvy?
Yes.
Because if you look at the older generation, for example, right? The older generation in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, 80s, they don't have much knowledge about technology.
This class, we have a lot of the woman and female student here. And you and I keep talking, the man and man, there's a gender inequality. So
exactly, you're very right, Professor Ko, very right. Let's give the floor to the women.
Please, female students asking to him about, any questions?
Feel free to ask your questions. I'm happy to take any questions, and I would like to hear from you as well, what you thought about. Has this given you a different way of thinking about tourism? A new perspective? Anybody can speak.
We have a message here.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. Any questions? No? Okay. If you have not questions, doesn't matter. Leave it is. But I have a question, Kimbu, again.
Yes, thank you.
Currently, I am study on AI much, like a human-like conversation. And I revealed this is a human, this is a AI with a picture, like a watermark case. and the people react differently about AI, the design, the marketing image, and human design marketing image. So it is quite differently react toward the AI and human. But we are going into the more specific way, like a gender. If we used woman, image on AI and man image on AI, probably consumers or customers or travelers probably reacted very differently about that, design. This is going to be very big, the research question. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think that is actually, I think that is going to be true if you have AI designed men and women images, broadly speaking, for us to start, there's going to be different reactions. What is going to be interesting, even more interesting, is going to be how women and men react to the different images of women and men.
Sure, right.
Right?
Like a man, if I ask to woman image of AI, probably I feel happy. But if I talk to man and man, I'm angry at the man and man, conversation. How about the female to female conversation with the image of a woman, female? Probably that's the big question.
That's the question, so there are a couple of strands which can come out of that, right? So broadly, generally, men and maybe the women are going to feel happy. The men might not feel happy if it's a man on man or it's a man on woman. But also, it might also be that the age of the person you're asking the question to, whether the age of the man or the woman is going to determine whether they are going to react in a different way. The educational level is going to determine whether they're going to react in a certain way.
But however, those kind of stuff is already researched a lot previously. So beyond that, it's now time to do research on AI and gender. It's like an education and aging is already past the research.
So, yes, no, I mean, but that is so that you adopt an intersectional approach linked to AI.
Okay, right.
You get the point. Right. So in addition to gender, adopt the other intersectional dimensions, right? Because the reactions are going to be different. For people who are used to AI, who are educated or not educated, they are going to react differently to AI because AI becomes the key construct there, which is worth investigating, right? Yes. And also the context where they live. If you're asking that from somebody in Africa and somebody in Korea, they are going to have different reactions to it. Right. So the context becomes also an important dimension that might be worth investigating and can generate some interesting insights.
So in terms of a theory of anthroponism including image, face, talking way, or attitude sort of things. So probably that theory, we should include the gender into the anthroponism theory.
Yes,
it's going to be good and hot topics.
That I think that should be included, and that's going to be probably an extension of it. So some sort of an extension of the theory. Yes.
Let's keep talking about that, our research agenda. Okay. Hey, students, you're still quiet. Any questions?
So there's.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. Just I want to say thank you because this lecture was so interesting, and your topics made me think about gender equality in tourism more because now I thought just like men are men and women are women, and this is not because we are less successful in entrepreneurship sphere. So because maybe that's not like the women's features of nature, because we are so successful in some certain spheres rather than men. So, but I should research somehow, and you pushed me your topic, pushed me think about this more. That's why I want to say thank you.
Good.
Thank you. So I think it's also important to note. I think something which I didn't emphasize in the lecture was that I mentioned it only briefly. Gender is socially constructed.
Yes,
that is something to note. So there's a difference between biology, sex and gender.
Right.
And sex is
biological. Sex is biology.
Exactly, man and woman.
Gender is socially.
It's a social construction. So what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman is determined by the society. And consequently, that's why you see men, the women who are identified as women, they in our studies, they tended to adopt male traits and behave like men when it came to running some aspects of their business, right? So the UNWTO still uses quite a lot men and women when looking at gender.
Yes.
But gender nowadays is seen as a social construction. And it is culturally determined.
Yes, right. Hey, Dr. Kimbu.
Yes, sir.
We are 2 hours seminars. Is quite a long time. I'm highly appreciate your participation and the great lecture and for our students. I know even though it's just the first day of the semester, probably a bit shy and then they just quiet, but they highly interested in your research. Probably they will read your articles. And,
thank you.
Okay, student again is era of AI coming to our life, and gender is quite interesting, and they combine with AI and gender and equality issue is a huge chance for you, I guess. What do you
exactly.
think?
I think the future is AI, but we live in a world of different genders and different sexes.
Right.
And so the two are inextricably linked and tied together.
Yes.
There is no way we are going to talk about AI without talking about the role of gender in influencing it.
Yes.
And there's no way we're going to talk about gender without talking about the role of AI in shaping how we construct our genders.
Sure, right.
That is important. And within our industry, which is people-oriented and people-centered, it becomes even more critical. Yes. So I do hope that this session has enabled you to have a bit of an idea of what it means to undertake research on gender in tourism, the avenues for research, the issues that women tourism entrepreneurs face, and some future research directions for some of you or those of you who will be interested in research in the future. So thank you, Dr. Kimbu, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's time to wrap up our seminar. Next time, when you come to Korea and touch down Korean land, call me.
I will.
Okay.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. See you
Bye.
later. Bye. 학생 여러분 수고 많으셨고 잠깐만 있어주세요. 오늘 첫날이라. Please waiting a bit seconds. Once again, as you know, this is a class. It's not the freedom of choice seminar. So person who listening and person who participate in this class, please turn on your video. It's a compulsory. You are a student. If you are voluntary participation in this seminar, it's okay because it's a voluntary participation. But if you are enrolled student in this class, please turn on your video because they have to interact with you and the communication with you is etiquette for presenters and invited speakers. And so I'm going to give the score who voluntarily activation participate to this seminar and also turn on the video or not. That's going to be your score reflection indeed. That's my comment. And once again, this is a very simple and easy course. You summary 1 page about this the seminar. That's it. And I'm going to give the score and a grade based on your participation numbers. So don't forget that the participation is important, and 1 page summary is important. And the minor fact is turn on the video and and actively conversation with the presenters. That's the minor school. Thank you very much. I look forward to you next week. The European people, if I invited, that's going to be move up to the afternoon time. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.